from CJ, but I'm going to stretch this out as long as I can here. It's like, oh, he started booing me, but as was a great honor for me. I met CJ and Betty in 1979. We had flown Sea Furies back to Florida for Miami Air Races. And CJ at the time was a flight instructor at Homestead, instructing in the F-4. CJ doesn't remember this, but you gave me my very first pair of no-mix flight gloves, which I still have somewhere. They're in a drawer somewhere. Anyway. I'd heard a lot about CJ and his exploits from Lloyd, who the two of them kind of grew up together, and so we already knew quite a bit about him, and from Lloyd's many stories. But CJ grew up around here. He'd probably tell you more about that. I think most people associate his career with all his accomplishments in the Air Force, but after retiring from the Air Force and coming back to Santa Rosa, just one thing right after another. He got right into unlimited air racing with our group of Sea Furies. And as part of the air racing, he got into the sport class. He's been active at EAN 124. He's been the premier test pilot for the CAFE Foundation, doing all their flight evaluations on so many airplanes. And then he's tireless, and he just goes and goes like the little Energizer bunny. But more than that, CJ is he's the litmus test. He's the sounding board. If anybody has a question or about anything kind of flying, this is our go-to guy. So he inspires us. He continues to inspire. I have to tell a story. CJ was losing a battle with bone cancer, and the doctor had called him in and said, CJ, we've done about everything we can, and so you should probably think about, we're going to take that leg off and think about what time frame works for you. And CJ smiled, looked at him and said, well, what are you doing this afternoon? That's the kind of guy he is. Just a real mentor, somebody that's really good to have in your corner, can answer a whole lot of questions and does on a frequent basis. So he's just an incredible resource here. So I'm anxious to hear. I think I've seen some of his presentation, but he always changes it up. So without further ado, Dr. Stevens.
Test. Lynn, I'm humbled. Even I don't believe all that. It's amazing how many people come out on a dark, rainy night to hear a one-legged fighter pilot talk, So I'm glad you're all here. It echoes with an empty room, so it's nice that you're all here. Lynn kind of covered some things that most of which I'm proud of, not probably all of them. But I did grow up here in Santa Rosa, went to Santa Rosa High School. And long about my early years, maybe about 15 years old, this Lloyd Hamilton he mentioned that was a Sea Fury owner around here, air race pilot and good friend for all my life. And I used to pedal this airport on our bicycles. And when I was 15, he just turned 16, we bought our first airplane, and so that was kind of set off on a career, and that was a way long time ago. And it's been steady aviation since then. I've never gotten tired of it, so I figured keep doing it. It worked for me, and I went on to have a good time to get to this point. Stayed alive. Excuse me. I have a little presentation here put together tonight. It's on PowerPoint, and we can step through this thing. I'm not a technical person, and so there's some pretty crude slides in there that are kind of hand-drawn, but it was either that or no slides at all. Of my experience in the Air Force, I have practically no pictures of it. It just didn't turn out to something you could really fly an airplane and take pictures, so I didn't get many. And I have moved enough times I don't have any of them left anyway. So some of these are downloads and some of these are hand-drawn, but that's what you're going to have to put up with and so forth. So thanks to Dana helped me put together as much as we've got here. We've got a few things that should entertain you at least. Long about 16 years old, I was getting pretty serious about aviation now. We'd bought at least one airplane by then, and probably a second one, And I remember kind of setting a goal about that time to join the Air Force. I remember I had an aluminum clipboard, which the intent was to take notes in class, but I don't think it ever was used for that purpose. But across the top of it, I'd etched into a U.S. Air Force. And so I think my mind was kind of goal set at that time. And so I proceeded along with the idea of becoming a pilot in the Air Force. But that became a point of when I went to apply for it, they closed pilot training to people unless you had a college degree. And I didn't have one and didn't know how to get one other than study, and that was probably something I didn't want to do. But so I went to junior college a little bit, and finally went in the Air Force as a NAV called Aviation Cadets, where you could do it without a college degree, but you ended up getting a commission to be a second lieutenant, but you ended up with navigator wings, which wasn't my goal, but it was a stepping stone to get there perhaps. The recruiter was very positive that I could just go out the next day and apply for pilot training. It was going to work great, but they're pretty good salesmen, and so it actually took me several years and a couple more assignments. I ended up going to bombardier training also in trying to get to where I wanted to be a pilot, and then I served about 3 years or 4 years as a navigator with some interesting jobs, and eventually reached my goal to go to Air Force pilot training. Probably the best year flying that anyone could have. Wonderful training, great airplanes. I'm flying at Phoenix at Williams Air Force Base, and it was truly a lot of fun. I worked hard and did well, which was important because coming out of pilot training, you got your assignment by your class standing, by your grades totally. So out of a pool of some 700 individuals and a pool of about 33 different kinds of airplanes, I ended up getting first choice, which was really important because there was only 3 F-4 assignments. The first time they'd ever gone straight from pilot training to the front seat of an F-4 without going to the back seat for a couple of years and more time, marking time. So it was worth all the effort I put into it, and so I did well there, and that was a good thing. Of course, it was in 1960 something 5, I guess it was probably, and the Vietnam War was going full speed ahead. So we knew where the assignments were going, but I did want to go to the assignment as the front seater, not as someone in someone's back seat. Not that I didn't like those guys, but if I was going to kill myself, I wanted to do it in my own hands. And so that was sort of a goal at that time. The program here is kind of broken down to, I think I want to tell you some of the equipment that we went to, kind of because a lot of people here in this room don't really appreciate what we were using, how it worked and so forth, what was available, what we had and what the other guys had, the bad guys had, to defend themselves. And then I'd like to take you through a mission that was fairly memorable in my mind, so I think you'll appreciate some of that stuff. And let's see, I've got a little thing here that should help me. So out of pilot training, I went to the front seat of an F-4. So now, with about 200 hours total time in the Air Force, I've been flying for 10 years already, so that was a big help, and that's why I was able to do well in pilot training, because I did have a big head start. You went to F-4 training, you got about 40 hours in the airplane, which isn't much time in a heavy airplane like that to learn all you had to learn. You had to learn day, night, refueling, gunnery, rockets, nuclear, conventional, the whole deal, which seems like about an hour on each, and then they turn you loose, you jump in a jet, and you end up over in Southeast Asia as a pilot. And with still a lot to learn, by the way. There's a few supervised flights, and then you are out there doing what they do with no more supervision other than the flight lead in the flights. So it really came very hot and heavy. You had to learn a lot. There's a lot of technical stuff to learn, and the flying the airplane is certainly challenging, and doing all that we did with it was important. So let me see if I can figure out how to go through this thing to... Did I do it? No, I didn't. It was the other way. Yeah. I backed up. So I thought I'd show you a little bit about your plane equipment, and then we'll go on to some other stuff. It's kind of in no real particular order. This is the back end of an F-4, obviously, and the thing I want to show there is a slatted version of the F-4. It's got, you can see the slats sticking up on top of the wing. It's also got slots, which are upside down, of course, on the horizontal to that was later, it was a mod that came very late in the life of the F-4. Before that, it was called a hard wing. This was called the soft wing, because the first one was called a hard wing. And anyway, it was a little bit heavier. It was the last of the E models that they built. This is an E model F-4. You can see that. First of all, it's a hard wing because you don't see the slats. And it's got about a 2-foot extension from the windshield forward. They moved the radar forward, and that's to make room for the gun, which you can see under the nose there. It had a 20-millimeter Gatling gun. It carries 640 rounds of 20-millimeter. If you haven't seen a 20-millimeter bullet, it's rather large. It weighs about 1.2 pounds, and you can shoot 100 a second. So when you shoot the gun, it just doesn't even sound like it's a gun. It just sounds like a motor running, and they come out really fast. It was very accurate when it was installed. The earlier models had a gun pod they carried under the center line, and it would carry 1,200 rounds of the same 20-millimeter. But depending on how the technicians put it on the airplane, depends on how accurate it was. They had to do a bore sighting job to line it up so it was pointed the way the airplane was. Otherwise, you couldn't hit much with it. But this is carrying, actually, it's a napalm can under his left wing made into a baggage pod. Didn't have any napalm in it. They put a door on the side and you could carry your luggage in that thing. Because there wasn't any place to put it in the airplane. It was solid stuff. Pretty airplane, you know, in the mind of the pilot anyway, because nothing is graceful about the whole airplane. It's just big and ugly. Oops, did I go backwards? Okay, no, it's a soft one. Another view of the slats. Another character about the F-4. You see the intakes, and it's got that big knife-like thing, that flat edge on the inside of the intake. That's to set up a shock wave when you're going supersonic to keep and it moves outward. It's hinged so it slides and closes up the intake a little bit. It moves the shock wave to keep it outside the intake. If it goes down the intake, it'll flame out the engine. So you can't go supersonic airflow down the front of these engines. Maybe nowadays they can, but you couldn't then. So going fast, that was the thing. Had big intakes, big engines, and made a lot of power. And now I've done something else. I don't know what we're doing there. Okay. This is, you can see the difference between the short nose and the long nose, between the D model in this case and the E model, which you've seen previously. Now, why are you not doing that for me? Dana, help. It's got one on here. Let me go back, okay? Let me go forward again. Here we go. Just another view. You can see it through the slats on that one. Some F-4 pictures, which we can see. Here's a Navy version of it. Notice the extended nose gear. For carrier launches, and these big cables they used to use to launch. They don't use that system anymore, but there's a couple of hooks under the leading edges, goes down to this shuttle thing on the ground, and then when they fire it, it launches them out there, and they hope they don't go swimming, but it takes off in a pretty short distance. I've never landed on a carrier. I never really thought it was a good idea anyway. But this is kind of a cutaway of the F-4 with all the parts they put in there to make this thing as heavy as they could. They were very successful. The airplane was about 32,000 pounds. The D model, the early ones, weighed about 32,000 pounds. That's 15 tons. That's a pretty heavy airplane. And the maximum takeoff weight was 58,000 pounds. So there was a lot of stuff in there with fuel and ordnance and other things that you could carry around with. But that's kind of a cutaway design with, it was pretty compact inside, a lot of stuff. We did it again? No. If I back up and come forward again, it seems to do it. There we go. This is just a picture of the Blue Angels flight. It was the only airplane both show teams were using ever, I think, certainly at the same time. But the Navy had F-4s, and so did the Air Force, and they both did a good show. I liked the Navy show actually a little bit better. I didn't tell anybody in the Air Force that. They both do an awesome show. The airplane was good at a show because it was very noisy. It was heavy. It went fast. It made a good show. When they went to the F-16s, I always told them they ought to put a noisemaker on that thing to make it sound like a jet, but they never did that. Anyway, go back up there. This kind of shows you a look at the air intercept radar. It was a huge, heavy package. That's why it had the big nose. The RF, the reconnaissance version, had a much smaller and pointed nose because it didn't have this huge radar in there. It actually had vacuum tubes for part of the electronics in there. So it shows you the era that it was built in. It helped. It was a good intercept airplane. It had pretty good radar for the day. We could paint an F-4 at 25, 30 miles pretty well, sometimes farther, but just you can count on pretty good pickup at skin painting an airplane that far away. It was designed initially, it flew with backseat pilots. It was during a time when Vietnam was building up and the powers that be thought, I think that's why they were doing it, they were trying to build up the pilot population for the war effort. So they put pilots both in front and back until they needed them, and they started upgrading and made a lot of pilots and put navigators in the back they were called pilot systems operators to start with, and therefore the natural thing that everybody does call them pesos. Well, they felt that was derogatory and denied you weren't allowed to call them pesos, so after that they just call a guy in the back. We call it Gibbs. So, that's what we do, you know. We try to make sense of the world. Go forward. Early on, it set a few time records, a few speed records, because it was a very powerful airplane, and at the time it was better than anything we had. The first record it went for, interestingly so, was the Navy attempted to set the low altitude speed record, and out in Tonopah, I think, or somewhere on the flats out of Utah, they went through the gates. It was a very pitch-sensitive airplane for the flying qualities, instability around transonic speeds. The Navy commander that was in the airplane to set the record, when he turned into the gates at a reasonable speed, he went into afterburner. Well, the afterburners are inclined down 10 degrees. It caused a little pitch down, but he's right in that transient, very pitch-sensitive area. He PIO'd it, means you get behind the whoopsies. The airplane disintegrated, and the two engines flew right out of the fireball, killed him right there. So they said, well, that's not good. The fix for it was it had a bob weight in the flight control system, not to get too technical here, but the bob weight was a 5-pound bob weight, which gave it its natural oscillation frequency. At the time it would kind of do that. They just changed the bob weight to 3 pounds and made it quite flyable, so it gave it a longer and slower oscillation frequency. And it just so happens it coincided with a pilot's oscillation frequency, and he kind of got behind it. Even though he was a test pilot, he still had trouble flying that one. And so later ones, they had the 3-pound weight, and they were a little more stable. They still were a handful. But that speed record, I think, actually held or something. So anyway, they went to set a couple altitude records. Before that, I think the T-38 held the altitude records. Here's 2 records. The first one, they went to 9,000 meters, about 10,000 feet, in 60 seconds from a standing start. That's pretty good. You can do it better now with bigger planes. And later went on to 30,000 meters, which is 99,000 feet, in just over 2 minutes. For reference, Will Whiteside here with his Yak that we set the records a few years ago at this airport. He went the 9,000 meter record in 2 minutes and 6 seconds, I think it was, that he went up there. So it's a little bit slower, but at the same time he's flying an old piston airplane that built by the Russians. And so, I mean, that's just kind of for reference, but tremendous big engines, very reliable engines on the F-4. J79 is a great engine. I had very few problems with it. Now, what are we doing? Going backwards again? Here we go. This just kind of to show a picture of it in a dive bomb, rippling off a few bombs. You can see they're carried externally. It carries a couple of fuel tanks out there. And most bombs were released, the 500-pounders, 750s, 2,000-pounders, whatever you're dropping. It's almost always dropped in a dive. 45 degrees was kind of the preferred dive angle. 30 degrees was another option, did quite well. But they need to be released, and you need to be pulled out by over 2,000 feet, because otherwise you'd blow yourself away. You could carry, this one shows about 18 bombs falling off at the outside of it. That's about as many as you could carry if you're going to carry a centerline tank. But you could pack quite a load of bombs on there. The airplane was smoky. Right from day one, it had that tremendous smoke trail. The Navy came along and bought smokeless engines. For some reason, they were quite expensive. It was like another $1 million for a smokeless setup. But we found in the Air Force, if you just go into one stage of burner, it would burn the carbon, and you would be smokeless. You'd also be going pretty fast, which was fun. So it worked out pretty good for us, and it made the smoke go away. maybe one, it kind of have to step over here, but this was some of the stuff it could carry, not all at the same time, however. Various forms of different things. It had missiles, you carry missiles, it had heat missiles, it had radar missiles. It had all kinds of ordnance you could drop, shoot, do what you wanted to do. And it shows a couple of fuel tanks also up there that you could put on board. So it really had a wide variety, carry everything. It carried nukes. It was really an airplane that could do everything. It just didn't do everything very well. It did a lot of things pretty good. And it kind of depended a little bit on the operator too, how you did things. This is sort of the belly view of an F-4. It's got a couple of tanks outboard. It's got the four, inside the tank is the heat missiles called sidewinders. And then up in the wells are some AIM-7 Sparrows. And it looks like he's carrying a gun, the gun pod on the center line. So you get a lot of stuff on there. This guy is pretty well rigged to go in an air-to-air mission with the 2 fuel tanks. The fuel tanks, those drop tanks, were 370 gallons apiece. You carry 2,000 gallons internally, and you could put a 600 gallon on the center line also. So you could get a lot of fuel on board, about 21,000 gallons, 21,000 pounds as it was. But that's what it looked like on all up air-to-air load. I'll just do it this way.
Like you.
Okay. Talk a little bit about what the bad guys had to keep our attention. This is an SA-2 guideline, which was their primary air defense missile. It's actually not a bad missile, evidently, as near as we could tell. I had never seen one like this before. I saw a lot of them without the booster stage on, which is the little fins in the middle there towards the back. That falls away 2 seconds after the thing launches. So every time they go by, you'd only see the front half of that, but it was usually going a lot faster than it is right there. They had a range of around 25 miles. They'd come at you at about 2,000 miles an hour or so. And the next picture, if we can bring it up, will show us. It's not like one more time. I don't know what that is. I'll back into this. There. This is actually a SA-2 site on the ground. Notice they got the radar van in the middle. That's where all the guidance and control is. And the 6 little circles around the outside, that's the launch stations where the actual missiles sit. And they always love to launch them 6 at a time. So, because you let the first one go by and get away from him, you better look for 5 of his friends soon following him. And it was always a challenge. And there was kind of 2 ways to get past these guys. If you were a single airplane or a flight of 2 or something, you would try to outmaneuver them, and you could do a reasonably good job of that by getting as much speed as you could, which usually meant like a 3 -G pushover full afterburner, and pick them up visually. And then when you couldn't stand it anymore, you pulled a lot of G's, and they couldn't make the turn. They'd tumble and blow up. The idea there is the missile is leading you. If you're going this way, and he's pointing out in front of you quite a ways. And so if you point your vector down, he predicts you to go down. And then when he's getting really close, you make a hard turn. And because he's leading you, he has to turn a lot harder than you do. And up somewhere around 20 G's, they tumble and they blow up, which is a good thing. Then look for his friend who's right behind him and do it again. And hopefully, if you do it enough times, they go by. A friend of mine claims 13 times he did that in one flight. That's missiles. And he drank a lot that night, is that what he thought? The other tactic that we used, which I'll tell you about as I get into the particular flight I want to talk about. Just far for me.
Yes.
Was to jam heavily. We had jamming pods on the airplane. We weren't supposed to go north without 2 jamming pods per airplane. And a big flight of 30 airplanes, that's a lot of electrons running around out there. And the idea is to, the scope that they look at, by a jamming pod puts a little blurry section on it. Scary. And by everybody jamming together and staying about 1,000 or 1,200 feet apart, you sort of wipe their scope out, was the plan. And so that'll pay dividends here as we talk about this a little bit more. Andy Werbeck, where are you? You're somewhere in the room here. There you are. He worked for the company, I said the company wrong before, Ally Signal? Applied Technologies, it's pretty close. That's the same address, it's just different name. Anyway, he worked for the company that made a system called radar homing and warning system, with a little box about so big. It had a little CRT on it that had strobes on it, and it had about 6 or 8 lights on it that would try to tell you something. The idea was if a radar locked onto you, to give you a little strobe, and by the length of the strobe, you could see it, predict it's either close or quite a ways away. You couldn't really tell too accurately. You might have more than one, or you might have a lot of them. And then as it detected different stages of the missile launching system, like he's tracking you, he's locked onto you, he's launched a missile, or he's guiding the missile with another level, it would light up different lights. That was a great idea. If you were just you and one of them, I guess it worked great. But the experience I had there mostly is soon after you got within range of them, the scope was completely cluttered with all kinds of strobes and all the lights were lit up, so it didn't tell you much other than you're in big trouble. And so that was part of the problem, but you kind of knew where you were going. You're going to see that anyway. At that point, you really just had to look. It's very hard to look when you know someone's shooting at you and trying to kill you, to look slowly. And to see something, you have to look and focus. You can't just scan from horizon to horizon. You won't see anything. So you need to be able to look and visually and pick it up if you're going to do any maneuvering with it, or else you just better hope that the pods are working good and the missile happens to go on by. I was going to say something there, but so that was kind of the missile deal. The other thing that about this time when those things are happening, is you hear other people on the air talking. But our experience was soon after there's a bunch of missiles in the air, the radio, you might as well turn it off. All you hear is like second grade girls with squeaky little voices making a lot more noise than they should, and everybody talking at once. Radio is of no value, and so you just kind of like do the best you can. Let's see. Refueling formation. This is kind of a typical force ship on a tanker. And crossing the ocean, that's kind of what you look like, although sometimes you're a flight of 6. And it's actually not that difficult after you've gotten some practice. The first time you try it, you think it's impossible, but after some training and practice, you can do fine. You can do it in day and night. You can do it in the weather. You can do it in turbulent weather if it's not too turbulent. But and you take on fuel. You pump fuel at about 100 gallons a minute, I guess, is what the kind of the rate is. So it takes a little while to put on, a full load of fuel. This would be a time to play, if that thing's going to play or not. Let's see.
First you got to get there.
Force that to play. I just want to kind of show some people what.
Go back to that slide again.
Back it up.
Yeah, back it up. Let me see if I can do it for you.
Back up there, baby.
Boom.
This shows an F-4 in the pre-contact position, getting ready to pull in and get some fuel. The door is up behind the back seat. You open it up. This is at night. Oh, there we go. Sun came up. Anyway, the boomer flies the boom over with those little wings and extends the probe. You hold real still. And he'll pump the fuel in there. You're on the tanker on a big load. You're probably there 5 or 6 minutes. Depends on how much gas you need. The plane gets heavier and heavier, and as it gets heavier, you got to keep adding power. If you're high enough altitude, you'll run out of power, and you have to put one engine in burner to kind of stay with him because he runs away pretty quickly. Yeah, you see fuel coming out of him once in a while to disconnect. And you're just looking under the rail, just flying a stable position. You're all done, you disconnect, you back out, move off to the side. Next guy gets in line, he steps up there, pumps gas. The boomers are very good. They're good at plugging and pumping gas. And then you go on, and you can do quite a few people.
I'll do it for you.
Yeah, okay. And part of this, before we get into the real flight here, mention some things on fuel. It's a really big deal. The airplane burns fuel really fast. It seems to carry a lot, but it seems to go away really fast, especially if you need it. This is the top line there shows with the two external drops, not the center line, you carry 2,200 gallons of fuel. That seems like that's a tanker truck full. Going from where we were in Takli, Thailand, we needed, you had to go get pre-strike refueling and post-strike refueling because you're going to burn the gas quickly at times. I did put the one line down there. The most fuel flow I ever saw in the airplane was 120,000 pounds an hour, where that's about 20,000 gallons an hour going through the engines making power. That's full afterburner, that's supersonic, that's as high as you can get it to go, and it's very close to that if that's not exact. The gauges don't show you that. The gauges only show what goes through the engine. You multiply by 4 and you get pretty close to what is burned on each side, so it's just a big number. To show you internal load without any external fuel was 2,000 gallons, and at 20,000 gallons an hour, that's 6 minutes, a tenth of an hour of total fuel if you could burn at that rate. So if you screw up and stay in burner too much, you really run out of gas in a hurry, and then it's not a very good glider either. So,
Here, let me do it.
please. Okay, this is the main part. Now, it's sort of a training lesson for you, the audience. Because as the story goes through, you need to kind of know what I'm talking about, or I'll get lost in the explanation probably. Okay, we used to fly, on the mission, we would fly a box formation. It came right straight out of the B-17 manual from World War II. And it was a flight of 4, next to a flight of 4, followed by another 8, followed by another 8, and on back until you had a whole lot of airplanes that go in the same way. Not particularly show formation, you would be spread out about 1,000 to 1,200 feet for pod coverage, so the jamming pods would give you good coverage to the radar scopes, and everybody's got 2 jammers, so it should have been a pretty wipe out the scope. The important thing in this whole slide is the roll in. This could be tough, trying to talk with my hands and not fall over. The roll in, if you're a force ship with the element, the 2 airplanes on the left, and you're rolling into the right, remember, you're going to roll in with a 45-degree dive. So that's done with like a 135-degree bank like this. A single ship, we did it all the time in training. But as a force ship, it had to be done differently because you wanted to end up in the same formation going down as you were going this way. And everything changes in a turn, the outside of the turn, the inside of the turn. So the way that was done, and we practiced it, it was actually a beautiful maneuver and a lot of fun. But the lead would give a big wing flash when it's time to roll in. Of course, everybody knew about when you're going to do it anyway. So 2, the guy on the inside, would go full burner and run right at him to just go underneath and up the other side. And as he did this, just as soon as he disappeared under the wing, the leader would start his roll in like this. 2 would slide up and outside because he had a little extra speed on the outside to turn and be in position. At the same time, 3 and 4 would each cross, and cross to the inside because it was a shorter distance, and you'd end up going down this way in the reverse formation. It sounds odd, but it's a little bit aerobatics, but it works great. Remember that training. Because once you're going downhill, everybody just hold the formation. You're back in the same formation, but you're going downhill about 45 degrees, which looks straight down actually. Speed goes from about 350 up to 500 or more. As you approach the release point, the wingmen are just flying off the lead. He's doing a controlled release on a target with a gun sight. At some point, he releases the bombs. Everybody just ripples all there. So they all fall off. And then you do something we'll talk about in a little bit. Next slide. Okay, that's all the training you get. So now we can start the story. Typical day. We've been targeted to take a strike force to Hanoi. We're living in Takli, Thailand, which is right over next to Burma, not too far north of Bangkok. It was nice there because they had, you weren't shot at and mortared all night long. It was kind of peaceful at night. The briefings typically were about 6 o'clock in the morning. Usually walk to the cafeteria, get something to eat, speculate on your chances of coming back for dinner, which it was not a big thing. You weren't really tense, you were focused. Long about breakfast time, you kind of think about how your day's going to go. You go to about a 6 o'clock briefing, brief for an hour. people that planned the strike would plan all the time from about 4 o'clock in the afternoon until about brief time, about the next morning, about 7 o'clock. It was about an hour before you'd go to station time. You'd head for the airplane about an hour before takeoff. Hard to believe that you needed to do that. You know, we were used to airplanes here. 5 minutes before takeoff, we walk out the plane, start the motor, and go. But there's a lot to get done, pre-flight and preparation, that you didn't want to rush. Sometimes an hour and 15 minutes, because you got a big package going together in this thing. This particular flight was tasked with 24, I think. I think it was 24 bombers carrying 11 750-pound bombs apiece, with I think 12 air defense with missile-loaded airplanes, which kind of do their own thing. They're with you as escort, but the flight we're talking about is the strike force. We'll say an 8 o'clock takeoff, about 30 minutes to the tanker. About an hour after you got to the tanker, it takes all the time to get people organized in the right direction, and I'll tell you how we do that. Off the tanker with a 10 o'clock takeoff. From off the tanker, it's about 30 minutes to the target area, and then come back another 30 minutes to the tanker, hopefully, and then a while to get back to the airport. Oh, you got the
Yeah.
Okay, this is kind of a crude drawing that I did regarding. We're showing 16 Phantoms here and 6 tankers. This is showing the ramp. The thing I wanted to point out there, we had a single runway and a single taxiway and a big ramp. I was always amused at the ramp. It was huge. It's a hot day and you're loaded with gear and you got combat vests on and pistol belts and G-suits and the usual stuff. To walk to the airplane, you'd be pretty hot and sweaty time to get there. So they provided us with bread trucks with some wooden seats on the side, and a driver would take the load of crews out and drop them off and various people. The ground safety officer at these bases was always overzealous. Everybody's trying to do the job the best they can. And so he was worried about people tripping on a curb and all the things that you could, ground safety stuff that didn't have anything to do with flying. So I was always amused because the drivers were not allowed to drive unless everybody had their seatbelt on. Now, maximum speed on the ramp was 5 miles an hour. And there's nobody out there but a few parked airplanes. And we're going to drive, a quarter mile across the ramp at 5 miles an hour, and he wouldn't move the vehicle until everybody had their seatbelts on. But we're about to jump in the jet and go out there and have people shoot at us. It just seemed odd to me, I think. But that's the way it was. And so, once you get in, start whenever your time is to start, airplanes everywhere, to get them all off on a single runway like that, because it take you 10 minutes at the end of the runway lined up to pull all the pins, do all the safety checks, the electrical shorting checks, and a lot of things to do that ground crews did at the end of the runway. So you need to all be ready to go at the same time. So you'd pull 4 in at one of the runway, and you go on the runway and wait on the runway. The next 4 would be in there getting ready, and we'd put 4 at the other end of the runway getting ready, and there was 6 tankers that had to cycle in with us also. So when it was finally time to go, they would take off. They couldn't take off in less than 20-second intervals because they're all loaded with ordnance, and that's got to be some hazardous. So with 20-second intervals, it takes a long time to launch those 8 airplanes. Then these 4 airplanes would go. Meanwhile, the rest of the people would come out, and they would do that while people are going out. And so the leader is trucking along at about 350 knots or so away from the airport, and his wingman will never catch him. So we had to figure a plan on how to get everybody together. And so I think I can do it this way. If that was the airport there, leader would take off this way when really the tankers were over that way. So he would go out 30 miles and arc the 30-mile arc around to pick up that radial. So as everybody went off behind him, they would go that way, and these guys would come off. And so it was pretty easy. Everybody had arrived at that point about the same time, so you got your flight together. Now, this may seem not too big a deal, and it really isn't. When you look at, I just saw a video the other night on the end of the World War II, just before the nuclear attacks on Japan, the launching of the B-29s off of Guam and the other 2 islands over there. They launched 180 airplanes off that same runway with 1-minute intervals. Now that's 3 hours of rolling down the runway. Where was leader? What was he doing for the 3 hours? And that's not even by scale important. They were 2,000 airplanes in World War II off of the fields in Germany. But get them all together is a major problem to get it together. But so, like I say, it wasn't that great a deal, but it had to be dealt with, so you all got there. You head out that way 100 miles or so to the refueling tracks. We drew a little map up here. I actually copied one off of some internet. This is Takli, Thailand over here. You can kind of see where Laos sits in the middle of between Vietnam and Thailand. China's up there. Burma's right over here. So we were right up against Burma. And this is the place we'd be launching off. Get over there. There was 3 or 4 refueling tracks, cherry, peach, and a few other fruit names. And you'd find the appropriate tanker and join up usually 4 airplanes on a tanker. That's about a 100-mile long track. They'd be doing this big, huge racetrack pattern up there. And it was sort of random because people would come from all different bases. Ubon's down here, Udorn's up there. So you all knew when to leave to get there at the right time. So eventually, after this disorganized event got going, you're all up there on the racetrack with the refuel. And as soon as you got there, you start topping off because it's going to happen pretty quick after this. So magically, you're going around and just as soon as you're full of gas, you move out, other guys, and you just keep cycling through the tanker. So at some point, it just was odd because it looked so chaotic, and then suddenly all the tankers are going in the same direction, sort of all line abreast, and they all got fighters hanging all over them. Several tankers with fighters. They have like a flight of 3, 4, 5 KC-135s, and you're all hanging on the back of them. So you'd all turn north, which means, you know, the drums are starting to beat, the tempo's picking up, and I'm sure your pulse is also. And you go north. As they got to a predetermined point up there, everybody's pretty well ready to go. The tankers would all turn back, and there'd be 8 or 10 or 12 of them all turning back. And now you're just together as a flight, and you sort it out to get into the proper strike formation, which is, again, back to the training, a 4-ship, 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 4-ship back with escort back behind you. And the escort could actually go faster than you and stay with you. That seems odd, but it's called a fighter weave. And the guys back there that could go, because the air-to-air guys have very little drag. They get back there at 0.9 Mach or more, and they're just doing this weave back there. And plus they can see back while they're weaving, see if anybody's coming up from behind. We didn't get a lot of air defense reaction after Christina's father went out there and taught him a lesson in Operation Bolo. That was a big day for them. After that, they only came up in a couple at a time, and they'd send a couple of MiG-21s, and usually a couple of MiG-19s would come out of the weeds and try to pick off the last 2 guys. But there was never any big effort of launching the Air Force, because they lost a lot of their Air Force that day, which was nice. And so, as you get north and you get in this formation, you're approaching the border there of Laos, and then you cross Laos, somewhere along in there, you set up your switches and make sure they're all right, because you only get one chance to drop them. Drop them properly. If you drop them with incorrect switches, you wasted the whole trip, and so that was never a good thing. So you set up all the switches, and at some point you turn the master arm switch. Means if the bomb goes off, drops away, it'll be going armed, and it'll go boom when it hits the ground, wherever it hits. Somewhere across the middle, well past the middle of Laos, things start picking up. You're in pod formation. I didn't show the pod formation. Why didn't I show that yet? This thing won't do yet.
X-line?
There's pod formation. Remember I mentioned pod formation? You need about 1,000 feet or more for separation so your pod can effectively jam. You're stacked high and low for, I don't know, somebody decided that was the thing to do. So it's not a hard formation to fly, except you're kind of looking up there at your leader, and you're going along. You're indicating about 350 knots or so. Leader sets his power at about 97%. And as much drag as you got, that you can only go about 410 or 420 knots, which is pretty slow. And you're running around 19,000 feet. Well, let me go back to the map. I think it's more sense. And so, as you approach the border of North Vietnam, there's a call about some MiGs up that are going to be bothering you. Of course, you've got these 12 F-4s loaded for bear, and there's only a couple of the enemy, so they're all anxious to go shoot something. This particular flight, the MiG-21s, came out of about 40,000 feet. When they got to us, they were going probably around Mach 2. I saw one of them go by, but they just went went through a ripping pass. They didn't shoot anything. They just kept going straight to China. Their purpose was to try to get somebody nervous to break out of formation enough. You get highlighted on their radars, and then their missiles can pick you up pretty easily. But being the disciplined warriors we were, we all stayed in our formation because we were scared to leave. And you press on. Not long, the MiGs went through, and of course, all 12 F-4s went off them as fast as they could. They couldn't catch them by the time they got to China because they had such a good head of steam when they got to us. As soon as they went through, they had this thing really timed. We've been there day after day, so I guess they should be able to figure it out. Soon after they went through, missiles were flying, and that's when the radios were jammed with our people yelling at each other and saying things. The raw gear was just lit up. That was little value at that point, other than there was a lot going on. And so you just basically hold your position and look. And about this time, my call sign was Bronco 2, and it's a call sign I shall always remember. The guy that was behind me, now he's 6,000 feet behind me in the same formation. We're all doing this pod straight ahead box formation. Said Bronco 2 right below you. And I heard that okay. Right below you is not good. So I rolled as mostly upside down as I could and looked for as long as I dared, which was probably 5 or 6 seconds, I don't know. You don't have a lot of time. And I'm looking for this white missile. It was nice they kept them white, because white against the dark jungle, generally you had a better chance at seeing them. I looked and looked for all of 5 or 6 seconds, whatever I could, and I said, he has got to be here by now, you know. So I rolled wings level. If I did, looked eye level, straight level, maybe 400 feet off my wing. Dead level, I see a missile, and it blows up right there. It was a purpley black looking ugly explosion. Fortunately, it's going fast enough that with the outward exploding parts, most of it went above and behind me. I think I didn't see it. I didn't get it either, so that was good. In the next several minutes, there was a total of 10 went through the flight. A missile went between me and the guy in front of me. He was about 6,000 feet in front of me. Went this way, and I watched it go up to the 40, 50,000 foot area and arc over and came back down somewhere. They eventually blow up in 60 seconds, so we know that. But we total about 10 of them went through just to keep us excited. As soon as they were done, we were in range of a few guns that were popping some big stuff, 57 millimeter, whatever was coming up there. Not too much, not too exciting. But during this time, this was going on, it's important that the flights don't get too far, the lines of airplanes don't get too far apart. You need to kind of stay together for the roll-in to be right, because you need a 45-degree angle, so you need to go to a certain point. If you're too far out there, you're going to have less dive angle. Shallower is going to make a short bomb, and it's not going to be a good deal. So we didn't know this just yet. Me being on the inside guy of the very lead actually we were the second flight back. So as we approached the time to drop, make the roll-in, like I said earlier, lead gives a big wing flash, I go burner and going to jump under him like this. So I'm about halfway there, and that's only 1,000 feet, so you picked up a little bit of speed. He's just starting to roll right, and I was going to slide underneath him, and I looked up, and there was a flight of 4, upside down, came right through us. My only call was Broncos brake left, and that's mandatory. You got to go max rate. You don't know what's going on, but it's a call you've got to honor. And they did. So our flight, instead of going right, goes hard left, and we meshed nose to nose with the other flight and went through each other this way. They were upside down going that way, and we were right side up going this way, which we immediately then continued what we were doing. Because things were going well. So we just went right back. Nobody said anything other than Broncos brake, and then you could see what was going on. And so downhill on the 45 degree, of course. And I'm now on the left side, because I did swap. Everybody switched sides. We're coming downhill, and you fly in formation, you're looking this way, and I look up ahead, and it looks, my first thought was that there was CBU going off on the ground, little sparkles all over the ground, explosions everywhere down there. And then I realized that there's no CBU on the flight. It was AAA going off at around 7,000 or 8,000 feet, and it looked so massive. I was looking to find a hole big enough to put the airplane through. You can't stop, you can't back up like you'd like to. So I couldn't find a hole big enough, but you just kind of like squint a little, keep going, and then along about 8,000, the bombs He ripples, everybody ripples, which isn't the end of the program. Then it starts getting exciting because now the idea is, it's called a jink out. It's just random. You don't want to track where they can track you. It's just random move. 3 Gs this way, unload, negative Gs this way, up, down. But generally we want to work southwest because that's where the post-strike refueling is. You're trying to gain altitude and go that way and get far away as you can from them. So you've got about 20 or so airplanes randomly maneuvering in all directions, up and down. They can swish by this way, and you're missing this one and missing that one. Yeah. But you're generally going in the right direction, gaining altitude, and working your way out of there. And in a few minutes, you're out of the range of all the gunfire and so forth, and things are starting to settle down. And pretty soon you've got you and someone else is flying, and then you and two others, and then you're getting together in these little groups working towards the tanker. Well, the tanker run was probably 30 minutes to get back to the tanker. And you're trying not to use afterburner. You'd like to use a lot of afterburner, but you can't afford the fuel really. And so if you do, you're going to be in worse trouble. So after things slow down a little bit, you kind of looking at your fuel and looking how far the tankers are and thinking, man, how much trouble I'm going to make. Well, the tankers have been listening on frequency. They knew that we needed the gas. They came out past they're given a latitude that they weren't supposed to go north of. But they came a good 120 miles or so out past that under the threat of penalty or whatever to get us. And we got there. When I got there, I had about 600 pounds left. And I'm, that's about 4 minutes or so to flame out. Well, I wasn't in worse shape. And I was one of the first or second ones there. So as soon as you get there, you jump on the boom. There's 8 fighters per tanker. They didn't send us a lot of extra tankers. And so got there and immediately plugged in. I don't know, picked up 500 or 600 or 700 pounds of fuel, and the guy next to me, he's down like 400 pounds. So you've got to get off to let him on. And then somebody else, so whoever's low is next, and he gets a few hundred, and he gets out, and so you work your way along south and back out of the area. It reminded me a lot of this. You've seen the stage show where this guy's got these sticks on this bench and he gets a plate going on top of the stick and then he gets the other one and he gets the other one. And he's running back and getting this one, he's running over getting this one. That's exactly what it felt like, trying to keep these guys in good shape. But the good news was we were going about 0.8 Mach, so that's 8 miles a minute. And we were getting farther away from them and closer to where we wanted to go. And so it went well, that particular strike. Nobody got hit, everybody got to the tanker. And we all made it on back home. Let me see if I'm missing something important here. Probably not. So you get home at, I don't know, whatever time, about 6 hours after you went to the briefing in the morning, and you're ready to do something like open a beer. One thing I clearly remember is after clearing the jink out stage of this thing was how my tongue was stuck to the roof of my mouth. And it just happens. But fortunately, you put a little flask of ice in your G-suit pocket, and by this time in the afternoon, it's warmed up to where nice cold water, and that tasted pretty good. We were there for almost 6 months. This particular organization, the 49th Tactical Fighter Wing out of Holloman Air Force Base, we had trained together for a couple of years before we went there, so we were fairly well qualified. We flew 10,000 missions in less than 6 months, and we never lost a man. We lost 2 airplanes that we bailed out of, but so it's pretty good success what we did. Exciting work, if you like it, it's great. That's about all I got, unless people got some questions or comments they want to. Yes, sir.
You said you're flying some of them into Hanoi, bombing Hanoi.
That particular mission was the airport that was northeast of Hanoi, right? Kep or I forget what the name. Might have been Kep. One was Kep. I forget which one.
Anything else? Locations you can tell us, or what?
Well, if I could remember them, I could tell you. But yeah, the Yen-Bai Railroad was another one we would hit. But that was over in the western part of the country. I could, if I had my point about whatever. But generally, the targets were area. So I worked this thing. Yen-Bai was farther up. Over here. Here we go. It was like way over in there somewhere. And that was out well enough away from their missile evade. It wasn't too much defense going through there. but in this type of bombing, it's area bombing, you know, I mean, airport, it's good for airports. We didn't do towns or anything like that. Aside from that, there were specific targets, like the thermal power plant, bridges and stuff like that, which they just invented the laser bombs, which they were able to do very good on point targets. But a massive strike like that was better for a big area like airports or something, beaches. Yes, sir.
You fly with any of the EV-66 destroyer F-4?
Yeah, they would, the standoff jammers, yeah. They were there, and early on there was an EC-121 that did standoff jamming, and it just depended on how they put the package together. You didn't always know what was out there doing stuff in support of what you were doing. You just kind of knew what you were supposed to do, and you kind of had some pretty good feel about it. Anybody else? Oh, yes, sir.
CG, on your jink outs, did you totally break formation, or did
Yeah,
you try to
yeah.
maintain integrity?
You're pretty much on your own because it's going to be pretty predictable if you don't. Yeah, you just kind of randomly did your thing, and it was just hope it worked out.
Okay, and
It
then you
did.
described a strike mission. Did you personally fly any big caps, or were you doing all strike missions?
No, this was in 72 time frame, October 72. It had been pretty well specialized. Udorn became the air-to-air specialist. They sent them to weapons school. They were highly trained in air-to-air, specialized, and it was a thing early in the war over there. It was expected everybody could do everything very well, and there was just too much to get good at. And so we all kind of were half good at anything. And so they when they specialized like that, they became better at what they did. Yes, sir.
What was your hookup time in an air refueling? I mean, you talk about going in and
Yeah.
out depending on how much food.
Well, it depends on how scared you were. As I described the post-strike refueling, when you're really low on fuel like that, you're in position on the tanker, and the guy is right pushing you. He's so close, his wing is practically overlapped. As soon as you disconnect, you'd get out of there, and he was on his way in. He'd be pumping fuel within 10 seconds, 8 seconds. You know, on a routine training mission, it'd be like a minute or two before they get on there. But this was like, they were quick. Everybody was, you had to do it quickly. Yeah.
I'm surprised that the North Vietnamese never did try to take out the tankers.
Yeah, they were far enough away. They were way down here. That's like, they didn't have enough gas to get there. I've flown the MiGs, and you'd run out of gas about halfway across Laos.
So there's nothing closer.
And plus, then you got escort up there. You know, our radars would know they're airborne. If they're going that way, they'd turn the tankers away. Yeah, I guess it wouldn't work. But they were pretty good about that, sending the MiG-19s up out of the grass, because everybody would look after the MiG-21s coming, and of course all these eyes are that way, and these guys come out of the weeds, they'd be right down in the deck, and they come out of the weeds, and did it pretty successfully for a while, picking off the back guys. Yeah.
Would those tankers stay on station or return to base? And
I don't know where they went. They gave us gas, and they were there when we came back, so I never asked. But I do appreciate them being there when I got back. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite target or a least favorite target?
They're all my favorite targets. No, I mean, every mission was different. Some were so quiet. Yen Bai one time was so quiet. It was early on, and you know, I don't know, you get this devilish idea, but dead quiet. I had a small flight of maybe 8 or something like that. I'm on the outside guy. Came down, bomb release. There wasn't even things said on the radio. There was no reaction at all. As I start downhill and we drop the bombs and we start off with a left pull-off, I look at the runway that was there, big concrete runway, right in my windscreen. I start letting off the stick. I'm going to go down there at 1.2 Mach, right down the runway. And the flight's going this way, and I thought, man, they're going to be so pissed. Anyway, I gave it up and went after it. But I really wanted to go buzz that place. I didn't. Maybe good judgment, I don't know. Yeah.
Did you ever have any contact with Crown?
No, you'd hear them do what Crown did, but
Yeah. Okay.
no.
What is Crown?
Crown was a radar, big radar up there somewhere in the sky.
Very classified.
Yeah, they'd point, they would announce from Bullseye, which was Hanoi, 50 miles south or something like that, some airborne targets, some MiGs or something would come up. They'd give you information. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah.
How many types of jet aircraft have you flown?
Ooh. Well, as far as fighters, it was the F-4 is really all I was ever qualified in. I've flown the MiG-15s and Iskras and Fugas and stuff like that.
You check out on the T-38?
Yeah, 38 and 37, yeah, that was part of the school. Yeah, 90-hour pilot flying around a supersonic airplane. I don't know. It was a great airplane, a lot of fun. Too easy to fly. You got a trainer that's the easiest thing in the world to fly, and you put him into a fighter that's going to spin at the drop of a hat. The guy that finished second to me in pilot training, he lasted a month. Spun in over and pitched out in the traffic pattern, F-100, fell over and killed him. Yeah, it was too bad, but you got to fly it right. Yes, sir.
You say you have flown MiG-21?
I flown a MiG-15. No, not flown a 21. Nice airplane, short legs. So is a MiG-15 though. 55, 60 minutes, you better be on the ground again or you're out of gas.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your service and your sharing it with us. We'll give you a challenge card. You can always put that to good use.
Okay, yeah.
Put more in the water than you can. I will. Thank you. Thank you so much. So everybody, pick up everything around you. If you haven't given anything to the kitty, donate. Donate to the kitty if you haven't. Thank you.